We are the Necrotizing Fasciitis Foundation, also referred to as NFF. Our mission is to advocate and to spread awareness about necrotizing fasciitis, a rapidly spreading bacterial infection that can destroy skin, fat, and tissue covering muscles, often referred to as the flesh-eating disease. To contribute, participate, or for more information, please visit our website at necfasc.org.
Hello and welcome everyone to The Steep. My name is Tim Hayden and I'll be your host. Our guest on this episode is Nicole Roach. Nicole is a necrotizing fasciitis survivor from San Francisco, California. She was a teacher for 10 years prior to her NF. Now she uses social media to spread awareness about NF and her survival. She also sells unique makeup. Nicole is a published author with her story in a book called Surviving the Flesh-Eating Bacteria. I'll now add Nicole to the conversation. Hello, Nicole. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
I'm doing well. How's your family and friends doing?
They're doing good. We had an exciting day yesterday with the wind, and the wind here has been terrible, so it sparked some fires. But it's much calmer today, so hopefully no more of that.
Yeah, you are suffering with a forever drought, I think.
Yes.
Well, we'll jump right in. Could you tell us about your necrotizing fasciitis, when it happened, how old you were, that kind of thing?
Oh, you cut out for a second.
You want to go ahead and jump right in and tell your story, tell when it happened, how old you were, things like that?
Sure. In June of 2013, the year I turned 30, I was a full-time preschool teacher, and I was teaching summer camp and went to school just like I usually do every morning, but my ankle was sore. I had kind of had some micro tears in the tendon around my ankle, and was trying to let it heal as much as I could, and went to work and found it increasingly difficult to walk on my foot. And by the end of that day, it was very swollen. And I went to see my podiatrist right away because I thought, I just assumed I maybe tore the tendon completely. And she assumed the same thing. She had me do an MRI that day, and she put me in a soft cast. And I went home, and that night spiked a fever and was in the worst pain that I had ever been in up until that point. And was at home with my mom, my stepdad, and I, couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable. And the next morning I contacted my podiatrist and said, something just doesn't feel right. She instructed my mom to cut the soft cast off and then to send her a picture of my foot. And we did that. And she then said, you need to get seen right away. And within the next 3 hours, I went from, sort of not feeling that great, but pushing through, to I was barely talking. And instructed me to go to the ER.
Nicole, you cut out, start back to where you were talking. You had just found out.
To where? I'm sorry.
You cut out, start back to where you were. You were at the hospital, and you realized what it was, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll cut this part out.
They thought it was compartment syndrome in my foot, and at that point, I went to the ER and I went to Stanford, and they knew pretty quickly that it was something much more serious. I barely had a blood pressure reading. They were prepping me in the ER for emergency surgery, and told my mom and my sister that I had necrotizing fasciitis. My mom had never heard of that before. She didn't know what it was. My sister did. And at that point, they started prepping me in the ER, put a main line in my neck, and did all of the things that they could do outside of the surgery room, and then took me into surgery. And they were very fast, because at that point it had already been over 24 hours since it started. My kidneys were shutting down. I had 2 partially collapsed lungs. And my leg was just in so much pain. And they took me for the first round of debridement surgeries, and told my family that, they were going to do their best to save my leg, but that I might not have it at the end of the road. And so they ended up, doing the debridement surgery. I was in ICU at Stanford, and I was in and out of consciousness, and spent a couple days in ICU and had more debridement done. And it got to the point where they basically had removed everything, all the soft tissue in the top of my foot, my outer ankle, and then up the outside part of my leg.
There's some pictures.
Yeah, so that was what it looked like right before they took me back for the first debridement surgery in the Stanford ER, and then had multiple debridements done. And it got down to the point where it was, you could see the bone. I could see my Achilles tendon. And at that point, luckily, I slowly started getting better, and it didn't progress any further up my leg. And it also didn't pop up anywhere else, which can happen. So I spent quite a lot of time at Stanford Hospital, and saw a lot of doctors, and they figured out that I had been just exposed to strep A, probably at work with all the kids that I taught, and it found a weak spot in my body in that outer ankle, and just took over within a day. And then at that point, I was in the hospital for quite a while, had multiple dressing changes. At first, they were doing it very frequently. Then it got to the point where it was just twice a day. And that was the worst part. The dressing changes were terrible. I've asked them numerous times why they couldn't just knock me out while they did it, because it's to have dressing changes done on something like that is not a fun experience. And not only did it permanently scar me, but my family, they had to watch all of that happen. And so they're all very protective of me now at this point, even though I'm almost 40 years old. It's been quite a while since it's been almost this June. It'll be 9 years since I've had since the first diagnosis. And it permanently changed my life. I was really sick for a really long time. They said I wouldn't be able to walk on my foot. They said I would need some type of mobility aid. And I was pretty determined to be able to walk. So I pushed myself pretty hard. And, and was able to do a lot of physical therapy at the end. That was probably the easiest part. I think the hardest part is when you're in the hospital and when you're just unsure of your outcome.
So while you're in the hospital, before you got out of the hospital, did the doctors tell you things that you might be able to do, might not be able to do?
Yes. I was bedridden for 4 months. And I was only allowed to put my foot down for, very short amounts of time. I was in a wound vac when I left the hospital. So I had a home care nurse that would come, change the wound vac, get me all set up, and then would come back in a couple days and do it all over again. And I was bedbound at that point, for quite a while. So I was told things had to heal from the inside up, and that once that happened, I would be able to have skin graft surgery done. And so it was mainly in bed. Family and friends were coming to visit. I had an amazing support system. My coworkers brought meals. My mom was my full-time caregiver. I needed her for everything. She had to wash my hair. She had to, she had to do everything at that point for me, bring me my meals. I didn't leave the bed very often unless it was to go to the doctor. And that continued until August. And then I was able to have skin graft surgery, which was a little nerve-wracking.
I bet.
Going back to the hospital was definitely triggering because of everything that had just happened. But they did an amazing job, and they explained everything really well. But I still had a lot of questions. And so I started doing some research just on my own about necrotizing fasciitis, about the different ways that people have contracted or ended up with NF, and then also how different everybody's prognosis. I mean, you kind of go from, I don't feel so great, to, then being told, I mean, I was septic. Your body's shutting down, and there's no way to really know how things are going to be after that. And it's different for every person. That's one thing that I found really interesting, is that no matter how you ended up with it, everybody's aftercare plan is completely different. It has to be individualized for that person and their needs and their story. And so, there's no one size fits all.
Right. So, did you ever discover any kind of open wound puncture spot that you could have contracted it?
No. So I actually didn't have an open wound. And I learned that most people do contract through an open wound. I didn't. I had, like I said, I had an injury to that ankle, and it went from just being slightly swollen to I can't walk on it. And then was told afterwards that not all necrotizing fasciitis cases have an open wound. that strep A, found that weak spot within my body and took over. And, there's no real why. Like, why does that not happen to the entire teaching population? You're around kids all day long, right? Especially young kids. There's lots of germs involved. And so, you get sick a lot.
Definitely. So, did you have to do much physical therapy after your,
I did. So they took skin from my thigh, and that was put on my foot. And I had to do a lot of physical therapy. I had to learn how to walk on that foot again and how to put pressure on it. So they started me on a stationary bike, and my only job was just to try to push the pedal forward. And they would manually bring it back around and put my foot back on top and just push forward. And we did that for a very long time until I could do it myself again. And so I was in physical therapy at Stanford until the next year. So all the way through till February of 2014. And like I said, I was pretty determined to be able to, I wanted to be able to walk, and it's my right foot, and I really wanted to be able to drive. That was like something that small, but for me, I wanted to be able to drive and have control of my foot enough to the point where I could, go to the grocery store. Right. And it took a lot of time. I graduated from a walker to a cane, and then to a collapsible cane that I would just use as needed, like getting in and out of the car. I would still need some help. And I still have the collapsible canes now because some days I still need them. My right leg is very weak from everything that happened and from not using it for so long. And then my Achilles is shortened. So I don't have a lot of like flexion.
Right.
So inclines, stairs, that kind of thing, it's a little bit more difficult to do. But I had to relearn how to do all of those things. Right. And it was frustrating. You go from being able to work and be independent to needing help for every little thing. And so I attempted to go back to work in January of 2014. And between January and June, I went back to work to cover one of our teachers was going out on maternity leave. And I thought at that point I was strong enough to do it. But my immune system had been so worn down that in those 6 months that I was teaching, I ended up at Stanford Hospital 5 times with recurrent skin infections in other places. I ended up with MRSA. I had cellulitis. I had staph. I had every type of skin infection you can have, I ended up with. And it kind of came to the point where they said, you can't go back to work. You tried, your body's telling you that it's just not the right environment to be in. Right. So I had to give up my teaching career after 10 years.
Well, you're on your feet a lot as a teacher also.
Yes, definitely. And with little ones, you're getting on and off the ground and you have to be able to move quickly. You know, I taught 3-year-olds. So
Right.
it's a lot of on and off the floor. It's a lot of being down at their level, which I could do. I could get down, but getting up was a challenge. And it's still a challenge sometimes now, you know, 9 years later. But at that point, it was too physically demanding, and then my immune system was just shot. I couldn't fight anything off. And the infectious disease doctor that I saw, she said, you know, you're going to have to stop working. This is, your body can't, you know, can only take so much. So I had tried. At that point, I felt like, okay, well, I gave it a try. I went back for 6 months. And luckily, like, they were so nice about every time that I would have to miss school and miss work, because I would end up back in the hospital. And each skin infection, they would keep me on IV antibiotics for a couple days. So I couldn't necessarily like take an antibiotic and go back to work. Like, it affected my entire body. And so I had to give it up, which was really hard, because at 30 years old, you don't think that you're going to be giving up your career. But I ended up with my own little boy. So
I was going to get to that. I know from talking to you before, I was going to ask you, the doctors didn't have a good outlook for that, did they?
no. So after the necrotizing fasciitis, and after having recurrent skin infections for, 8 months, my cycle had completely stopped. And so I went to see a specialist, and, she said, your body's been through so much that, it might not be something that is in the cards for you to be able to carry a baby. I also, besides having the whole necrotizing fasciitis ordeal, I have a rare genetic disease that causes faulty collagen. So collagen is like a glue that holds yourself together, basically all over your body.
I did my homework.
Yeah,
I had to look it up too. So I went ahead and wanted to share it with everybody what it was. I'm a nerd like that. I like to know things.
No, it's a very interesting disease. It affects your collagen, and it manifests differently in each person that has it. And it can cause a lot of complications when it comes to pregnancy and carrying a baby full term, let alone just being able to get pregnant to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So when everything stopped, and at that point I went to see my gynecologist, and she was just like, I don't know that you're going to be able to carry a baby. You have all these things that are kind of stacked against you, right? And that was hard, because I felt like I had given up my job teaching kids, and to then be told that I might not be able to have my own was a lot to take in. And I, at that point, was just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to leave it up. I'm going to let it go and leave it up to God and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And my boyfriend and I, at the time, we were living together, and right around Thanksgiving time that year, I had just gotten out of the hospital again with another skin infection, and was back home. And I just started to not feel very well. And I just kind of brushed it off to, like they were telling me, your body's been through a lot. You're going to need downtime. Don't push it. You know, I couldn't be around large groups of people because they were afraid of me getting another infection since my immune system just was shot. And so I was kind of limited in what I could do at that point. And in January of 2015, I went to the doctor, and she was getting ready to order a whole panel of blood work to test my hormone levels to see if it maybe was possible that I could have a baby. And the appointment ended up being very, very different. It went from, we're going to send you to have all these tests, to, oh no, we don't have to do that. You're pregnant. And I told her no. I was like, I'm not pregnant. That's impossible. Like, I haven't had a cycle in 8 months, 9 months. You know, how can you get pregnant if you're not having a regular cycle? She said, we're going to do an ultrasound right now. And she did. And I was almost 7 weeks pregnant. I got to hear my son's heartbeat right there. And I was completely caught off guard. My mom was with me. We were crying. It was very emotional. And I still almost didn't even believe it was real. Because when you're told you can't.
Did you have any complications throughout your pregnancy?
I did, yeah. Because of the Ehlers-Danlos causing your body to kind of like already be very loose. And when you're pregnant, your body releases a hormone that loosens your joints to prepare for childbirth. So I had a lot of pelvic instability and hips. My hips were pretty wonky. Right around 5 months, I had my pubic symphysis separate. So my pelvic bone separated, which made it very difficult to walk. And I was put on modified bed rest at that point. And then at 30 weeks, I was hospitalized with early preterm labor, which we were able to stop. And I had low fluid on one side. And so, you know, my son's name is Joey. He was kind of stuck in one position because I had less fluid on one side. And after the 30th week in the hospital, then the 33rd week of my pregnancy, I was in the hospital again. And they said, this baby is going to come early. At that point, I was just trying to get to 37 weeks. We had a scheduled C-section at 37 weeks. They did not want me to have to go through labor because they were concerned that my hips would completely dislocate and then I wouldn't be able to physically care for my son. So I was just trying to get to that 37-week mark. And the 33rd week, they kept me in the hospital for a couple days and did steroid shots. Those speed up the baby's lung development because they knew he was coming early. And at that point, they wanted to do everything that they could to try to make it so that he would have less time in the NICU. And at 35 weeks, my water broke. And at that point, they said, we're going to go with it. And he was born on July 26th of 2015. And I had my last skin infection in December of 2014. I didn't have a single infection my entire pregnancy. Being pregnant boosts your immune system because your body's trying to give so much. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten pregnant, because I was so sick off and on, that whole year. And the only thing different that happened is that I got pregnant. My infectious disease doctor explained to me how your body during pregnancy boosts your immune system. And that's the only explanation that she could give me. And I've had very minimal skin infections in the last almost 7 years. So, I feel like my son saved me in so many ways. I was so sick prior to having him, and to come out of it on the other side and be a healthy because of him, I don't think there's there's no other explanation. There's just, he saved me, and my immune system is a lot stronger because of that. And
That's great.
And he's the best.
Could tell from the pictures. Well, I'm going to jump back to the NF real quick, and a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. How psychologically and emotionally, how did it affect you, your NF?
So I started having anxiety attacks in the hospital when I knew they were going to be doing a dressing change. So they started me pretty quickly on anti-anxiety medication that they would come in and they would administer that prior to the dressing change, because I would get I knew it was coming and I knew how bad it was going to hurt. And then I had problems sleeping because I had nightmares. And that still happens now, not as often as it did in the beginning. It was very difficult to sleep because you have this combination of being in so much pain and then knowing that, at any given time, because I had it in my leg, it could have popped up in my hand. It could have, there's all these things that you worry about. And I was very focused on setting a small goal for myself. I wanted to be able to go to the bathroom by myself. That was the first thing I wanted to be able to do. So I set small goals, and that helped a lot with just the focus, because it gave me something positive to focus on instead of counting down the hours until they were going to come back in and rip everything off. And, and so, I still struggle with anxiety and post-traumatic stress. Even now, 9 years later, after having my son, my anxiety really kicked back in, and had some postpartum anxiety. I was very concerned about if something else happened to me at this point. I have a baby now, and going in for an emergency C-section, that being the first surgery that I had since the skin graft, was scary. I know a lot of women who have gotten necrotizing fasciitis after having a C-section. So there were definitely extra measures put in place to keep things as clean as they possibly could be, so that I was at a lower risk of having something like that happen again. But the nightmares, the flashbacks, certain things that would trigger me. And sometimes it's something very small. You know, it's not necessarily talking about it doesn't really bother me anymore. It's more now I think about the long-term things. Like if it's this hard now for me to physically get around, how hard is it going to be 5 years from now on my leg? You know, and I've had to kind of get over the fact that it's okay for me to use a cane. It's okay for me to, you know, have to sit down. It's okay for me to have to elevate my foot because it's completely swollen at the end of the day. You know, there are things that I had to kind of get over the way that people would see me and just focus on the fact that I needed to be able to move around. I want to be able to go and, you know, volunteer at my son's school. I want to be able to, you know, continue to do that and support him at school, support him in whatever sports he might want to play, or, you know, all those little things I worry about. So I do still have a lot of anxiety. I pretty soon after getting back from the hospital, started therapy, and I couldn't go anywhere because I was bedridden. But my therapist and I would do phone sessions because I couldn't go. And it was hard to find somebody that would do that. And, you know, this was 9 years ago, because they really want you like there, physically there when you're doing, you know, when you're doing therapy. And she was great. And she gave me a lot of different tools and things to try to do. The grounding technique is something that I still use like almost weekly, where if I start to feel myself getting a lot of anxiety, you use your senses. So you stop and, you know, you touch something soft or a pillow or lavender, like I'll, you know, smelling something that's calming, giving myself time to just sit down and take a breath. And, you know, I think that having the tools sometimes, you know, you have days that are harder than others. And I mean, everybody does, right? Like everyone across the board has days that are harder than the day before. But I do, you know, have the post-traumatic stress and then post-traumatic anxiety disorder as well.
It sounds like you got some good coping skills, though, that generally would help you out. I applaud you for going to treatment. I know a lot of people need to and won't. I think it's one of the best things a person could do for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to work on yourself, right? Like, and I knew from just struggling with a chronic pain disease and then having necrotizing fasciitis on top of it, you know, I already had all these things, like all these strikes against me, basically. And I felt like it's a lot easier to just give in and kind of sink in the hole. It's a lot harder to climb out. And that's something that, you know, you have to be ready for, and you have to want to do that. And it's a lot harder than, you know, than just giving in and giving up. And I've always kind of tried really hard to focus on the positive and focus on small things first. and having a baby through a totally different set of emotions and anxiety, and just that changed everything. And I had to be the best that I could be for him, and I still do. And but I have hard days. I have days where I'm not okay. And I have days that I need a little more help. And luckily I have a very supportive family, and my entire family, my parents, my extended family, they've all been so supportive. And I think that makes a big difference.
For sure. A good support system helps you recover and maintain your psychological awareness. What would you tell, any advice or anything, a new person going through NF?
I would tell them that the most important thing that I learned about myself is that it's okay to ask for help, and that it's okay to need time. I think people sometimes put so much pressure on themselves to feel better and be better and snap out of it. And you have to be gentle with yourself. You have to give yourself the time to get there. And that timeline is different for everyone. And it's not always at an uphill climb. You're going to have days where you're not so good, and that's okay. But asking for help and being able to accept help, I think is a huge lesson that I learned. And I still sometimes have a hard time asking for help.
Well, you've got one that's going to be helping you a lot coming up pretty soon.
That's true.
He's a handsome boy. He's a handsome boy. Well, Nicole,
best.
I appreciate you being here, telling us all about your experience with NF.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
One more thing, you want to tell us a little bit about your makeup? I've got the website right there.
Oh, sure. So after having my son, I realized that one of the things that I stopped doing was my makeup. Because I wasn't necessarily going out and leaving the house very often. And when I did, I had, a baby with me. And so I wasn't as focused on it. And one of my girlfriends would post photos, and she would comment on how doing her makeup made her feel better. Not necessarily that it changed the world, but it made her feel better. And I thought, gosh, I wonder if that would work for me. So I started doing my makeup more often. I would go to a play date for the babies, and I would put a little bit of makeup on. I called it a 5-minute face. What can I do in 5 minutes? Right before we leave. And I found this company called Unique that sells makeup and skincare. And I have incredibly sensitive skin. Ehlers-Danlos, you have really thin skin. And so because of that thin skin, you can be really sensitive to products, or even just like a lotion. I'm very limited on what I can use that doesn't cause a negative reaction. And so I started trying it, and I didn't react to it. I didn't have itchy red hives or anything like that. And so I started doing my makeup more often. And then I decided to go ahead and join and become a presenter. And now I sell makeup and skincare for them through the company. And I've made a lot of really good girlfriends through it. It's not something that I necessarily do. It's not for the income. It's more because I enjoy doing it. And I enjoy getting to show other women maybe just like a small thing that they can do that will help you feel better. I think as a mom too, you're so focused on everybody else and doing things for everybody else that, sometimes you feel like you can't take a couple minutes to yourself. And so at least once a week, I try and do something for myself. Face mask, just something small. While my son's at school. Now that school is finally back in because of COVID and everything, he was home with me. Now he's finally in school, which is it's helpful, because then you're able to take time and not have it necessarily impact him. I can take some time to myself while he's at school, and not feel guilty about it.
Exactly. Well, if everybody has any questions or comments for Nicole about her experience or even about her makeup, you can find her on Facebook or send it to the show and I'll get her the message, or even better, visit her website and check out some of her makeup products. Thanks, Nicole, for being here today.
Thank you so much.
I'll talk to you later.
All right.
I want to thank Nicole again for being here today. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And always remember to be kind and to smile.